Man finds family of dogs that are thrown by the roadside. When he finds out who did it, he does something unbelievable. It was a quiet, overcast morning when Jack went out for his usual walk. The air was crisp and the ground was still damp from the night's rain. But Jack loved the stillness of these early hours. As he walked along the winding, deserted country road, he enjoyed the sounds of nature, the rustling leaves, the distant chirping of birds, but something unusual caught his eye. Just a few feet off the road, partially hidden in the tall grass, he noticed a small pile of something pale and moving. He squinted, trying to make out what it was. As he stepped closer, his heart sank. There, on the edge of the road, was a cluster of tiny, wriggling puppies. They were no more than a few days old, their eyes barely open, shivering in the cool morning air. Their soft, pale fur was damp and covered in bits of dirt, and their little bodies seemed far too small to be alone in the world like this. Jack's stomach turned as he knelt down, realizing that someone had left them there, vulnerable and defenseless with no mother in sight. Then, just a few feet away in the underground, Jack caught a glimpse of something else. A pair of eyes watching him warily from the shadows. It was an adult dog, her brown fur blending into the foliage, crouched low to the ground. She looked worn out, her ribs slightly visible beneath her coat, and her eyes held a deep sadness. Jack could see she was afraid, but also determined to stay close to her puppies. She didn't move toward him, but she didn't run away either. Jack stayed quiet, careful not to frighten her. He felt an overwhelming wave of sadness as he looked at the puppies again, realizing they had been abandoned. The idea of leaving them here was unthinkable. His mind raced and he felt a mix of anger and sorrow, imagining what kind of person would leave these helpless creatures by the roadside. He knew he couldn't just walk away. Slowly, he reached out his hand, palm up, hoping to show the mother dog he meant no harm. She watched him cautiously, her body tense, but her eyes softened just a bit. In that moment, Jack felt a connection, a shared understanding with the dog, as if she knew he was there to help. Welcome back to PlotTwister. Before we unravel today's mystery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you're always in the loop. Jack moved closer, his heart heavy as he took in the scene before him. The puppies were curled up tightly against each other, their tiny bodies trembling from the chill in the air. Each one looked so fragile, with their pink noses and closed eyes, almost as if they were too young to understand the danger they were in. He could see that they were trying to keep warm, their little paws tucked in, and the sight was almost too much for him to bear. They seemed so vulnerable, lying there in the dirt, as if they had been left without a second thought. The mother dog, still keeping her distance, let out a soft whimper, as if to remind Jack that she was watching him closely. Jack glanced back at her, noticing the fear and desperation in her eyes. She looked torn between the instinct to protect her pups and the reality that she didn't have the strength or resources to help them on her own. Her gaze was fixed on him, a silent plea hidden in her weary face, and Jack felt a pang of anger mixed with sadness. He knew this dog hadn't chosen this life. Someone had forced her into this harsh reality. Gently, Jack knelt down beside the puppies, careful not to startle the mother any further. He could feel her eyes boring into him as he reached out a hand and lightly touched one of the tiny warm bodies. The puppy squirmed a bit but didn't resist, too weak and exhausted to respond fully. Jack felt his throat tighten. These puppies didn't just need help, they needed a miracle. He turned his gaze back to the mother, speaking softly to her, though he wasn't sure if she understood. She seemed to relax just a little, her body sinking slightly into the ground, as if she could finally let her guard down for a moment. Jack carefully scooped up each puppy, cradling them gently in his arms. The mother watched every movement, her head tilted, and after a tense moment, she took a hesitant step forward, following Jack's lead as he moved back toward the road. The quiet road, once empty, now echoed with a new sense of purpose, as Jack carefully carried the fragile family toward his car, ready to bring them to safety. Back at his modest home, Jack set up a cozy corner for the mother dog and her puppies. He found an old blanket, soft and worn, and laid it down in a quiet spot near the corner of his living room. Gently, he placed the puppies on the blanket one by one, watching as they snuggled into the warmth. The mother dog, who he decided to call Daisy, padded over cautiously, circling the blanket before lying down beside her pups, curling her body protectively around them. Jack sat nearby, keeping his distance to avoid overwhelming her. Daisy kept her eyes on him, her gaze wary but less frightened now. He could see her exhaustion, her head drooping slightly, and her eyelids were heavy, but she refused to fully relax, still guarding her little one. Jack spoke to her in a soft, reassuring tone, letting her get used to his voice. He could sense a slow, tentative trust beginning to form between them. The days that followed were were quiet, each one blending into the next as Jack's routine changed to accommodate his unexpected guests. He bought Daisy food and fresh water, watching as she slowly gained back some strength. Her ribs, once so visible, began to soften under a healthy layer of fur, and her coat started to shine again. Each time he refilled her bowl or tidied the area around her and the puppies, Daisy watched him closely, but her eyes held a different expression. Now, something closer to gratitude than fear. One morning as Jack refilled the water bowl, he felt a soft nudge against his hand. He looked down to see Daisy's nose pressed gently against his finger. It was a small gesture, but to Jack it felt like a breakthrough. She was no longer just tolerating his presence. She was accepting him. A connection was forming, fragile but real. The puppies, too, were growing. Their eyes opened, revealing bright, curious gazes that followed Jack as he moved around the room. They stumbled clumsily over each other, learning to walk, their tiny tails wagging with new energy. Jack found himself smiling more often, charmed by their innocence and resilience. His home, once quiet and empty, now felt alive with the sounds of soft barks and playful yips. And with each passing day, the bond between him, Daisy, and her pups grew stronger, filling a space in his heart he hadn't known was empty. A few weeks passed, and Jack's little family of dogs seemed to settle comfortably into his home. The puppies were thriving, growing stronger each day, and Daisy had softened into a calm and watchful presence. Jack was relieved to see her finally resting, no longer carrying that haunted look in her eyes. But one afternoon, a small detail disturbed the peace that had developed in his home. Jack had taken Daisy and the puppies to the vet for a checkup, wanting to make sure they were all healthy. As the vet examined Daisy, he pointed out something Jack hadn't noticed before: a faint tattoo on Daisy's inner thigh. It was barely visible, faded with time, but the vet explained that these marks were often used by breeders to identify their animal. Jack's stomach turned as he listened, realizing this mark hinted at a past that Daisy couldn't escape. On the drive home, Jack's mind was spinning. The thought of Daisy being discarded simply because she no longer served a purpose filled him with anger and sadness. He hadn't considered that she might have been used and abandoned in such a careless way. The idea clung to him, gnawing at the back of his mind, and he couldn't shake the sense that there was more to her story than he initially realized. The next day, as he walked through the neighborhood, he overheard a conversation between two neighbors. They were talking about a local man, Earl, who was rumored to be involved in some questionable breeding practices. Jack's ears perked up at the mention of Earl, though he tried not to show it. He listened carefully, catching bits and pieces about dogs sold cheaply, animals kept in poor conditions, and whispers of neglect. He felt a chill run down his spine as he began to piece things together. Back at home, he looked at Daisy and her puppies with a newfound understanding, realizing they might have come from this very operation. The peaceful life they had now was worlds away from the hardship they might have endured. The thought left Jack restless, and he found himself paying closer attention to any rumors or conversations that hinted at this underground world. He didn't know exactly where this path would lead, but a seed of curiosity and anger had been planted in his heart, urging him to learn more about Daisy's past and the man who might have cast her aside. As the days went by, Jack couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him. The image of that faint tattoo on Daisy, coupled with the rumors he'd heard about Earl, lingered in his mind. He felt an overwhelming urge to confront the man responsible for abandoning this little family. His hands clenched with anger at the thought, and he knew he had to see this for himself, even if just to confirm his worst suspicions. One afternoon, Jack found himself walking down a dirt path on the outskirts of town where Earl's rundown property was rumored to be. The air was thick and silent, the kind of quiet that unsettles the heart. Ahead, he could see a sagging, dilapidated barn, its wooden boards worn and weathered, with broken windows covered in grime. As he approached, he felt a mix of fear and determination swirling inside him, pushing him forward, step by careful step. When he reached the barn, he peered around cautiously, hoping to go unnoticed. The smell hit him first, an overpowering stench of uncleaned kennels, of animals left to suffer in close quarters. His stomach turned as he took in the sight before him. Cramped cages stacked against the walls, each holding a dog with matted fur and hollow eyes. Some were pacing frantically, others lay listless, as if they'd given up hope. It was clear that this place was no home. It was a prison. Jack's eyes scanned the cages, and he felt his heart ache at the sight of these dogs, each one seemingly forgotten and discarded. He clenched his fists, the anger now a steady fire within him. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence. Earl, a heavy-set man with a gruff demeanor, stepped out from the shadows, his eyes narrowing as he noticed Jack. "What are you doing here?" Earl barked, suspicion lacing his voice. Jack held his ground, meeting the man's gaze without flinching. He didn't answer right away, but the disgust in his expression spoke volumes. Earl's mouth twisted into a sneer as he stepped closer, dismissing Jack with a wave, as if the suffering around them was nothing more than than just business. But Jack couldn't ignore it. Every instinct told him he was looking at the man who had abandoned Daisy and her puppies, and as he left the property, his resolve hardened. This wasn't over. For Daisy, for her puppies, and for all the other animals trapped in that barn, Jack knew he had to do something. Back at home, Jack couldn't sleep. The haunting images of those caged dogs and Earl's indifferent face played over and over in his mind. Daisy lay at his feet, her puppies nestled beside her, each one a reminder of the cruelty she had endured. Jack felt a surge of anger, but also a fierce determination. He couldn't stand by while this man continued to profit off the suffering of innocent animals. He knew he had to act, no matter how daunting the task seemed. The next morning, Jack began making calls. He reached out to the local animal welfare organizations, explaining what he had seen at Earl's property. At first, some of them were hesitant, warning him that without proof, it would be hard to take legal action, but Jack wouldn't be deterred. He described the cages, the filthy conditions, and the haunted eyes of the dogs left to waste away in that barn. Slowly, people began to listen. One organization took a special interest, agreeing to investigate further with Jack's help. Days turned into weeks as Jack worked tirelessly with the welfare group, gathering evidence and rallying the community. He spoke to neighbors, shared Daisy's story, and gradually others came forward with stories of their own. Stories of puppies sold too young, of sick dogs that had been cast aside. The outrage grew, and soon enough the entire town was watching. Finally, one crisp morning, a convoy of vehicles pulled up outside Earl's property. Jack stood among the crowd that had gathered, his heart pounding as he watched the officers and animals welfare workers approach the barn. Earl came out, his face twisted in anger and defiance, but he was outnumbered. They showed him the warrant, and after a tense standoff, he grudgingly stepped aside, sneering as they entered. One by one, the rescuers carried out the dogs, each one a testament to the suffering they had endured. Jack felt tears sting his eyes as he watched them, some cowering, others too weak to even lift their heads, but he knew they were free now and that their lives were about to change. In the weeks that followed, Earl's operation was shut down for good. The rescued dogs were placed in loving homes, including Daisy and her puppies, who officially became Jack's family. Word spread about Jack's courage, and his story became an inspiration, a reminder of the power of compassion. Jack looked at Daisy and her pups, feeling a warmth he hadn't known before. Together they had found a new beginning, and for the first time in a long time, Jack felt truly at peace. What are your thoughts on the twist we uncovered today? Comment your ideas below. Make sure to like and subscribe for a daily dose of drama and mystery. See you later with another twist.